Hello, I'm Laura Sabatini, Principal Researcher in the Human Capital Center, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Off the Shelf, a book discussion series brought to you by the Conference Board. Today, I'm here with Jennifer Brown from Jennifer Brown Consulting to speak about her latest book, How to Be an Inclusive Leader, Your Role in Creating Cultures of Belonging Where Everyone Can Thrive. How to Be an Inclusive Leader, Your Role in Creating Cultures of Belonging Where Everyone Can Thrive examines how we, as individual contributors, leaders, or team members, can help create more inclusive workplaces. The book recognizes that people are at different starting points in their inclusion journeys and shows what leaders at any level can do. It provides insights and suggestions on how to cultivate inclusion, as well as simple steps to get started or to get better at being inclusive leaders in today's world. Jennifer Brown is a leading diversity and inclusion expert, keynote speaker, best-selling author, award-winning entrepreneur, and host of the Will to Change podcast, which uncovers true stories of diversity and inclusion. She's founder, president, and CEO of Jennifer Brown Consulting and has worked with some of the top Fortune 500 companies and nonprofits around the world. In addition to How to Be an Inclusive Leader, she also authored Inclusion, Diversity, the New Workplace, and The Will to Change. Jennifer, really glad to have you here. Welcome to Off the Shelf.
Thank you, Laura.
I would like to start with a couple of questions about how the book came about. One important feature of the book, in my perspective, is its intentional focus on the how to become an inclusive leader. What was the inspiration for you to write the book? How does it build on your previous work?
Yeah, thank you. I think the first book, looking back, it was making the case, right? The why. And laying out a lot of data and research and my own story and my why, my personal why of doing this work and being so passionate about it. So the second book, I really wanted to make it practical. And I also think that the appetite for the how conversation is now. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, this is an evolution for us as a field, but also for our audience, right? Our audience of learners. I do think even a short number of years ago, I spent a lot of my time and energy, and my team did as well, making the case for the why. Mm-hmm. And it sounded like, well, why is this important? Like, is it just another to-do? Or is it compliance? Or you say I need to check a box and send everybody through unconscious bias training. I think that all the things we predicted are coming true. They are literally happening to leaders and managers everywhere. And so I find myself not needing to make the business case argument so much. Mm-hmm. So I do think the time and the appetite to say, okay, I'm ready. I understand there's a problem. I understand there's a gap. I'm not going to be in resistance mode or defensive mode as much as I am hopefully in a curious mode. What is Jennifer talking about? What is this thing? And what does it have to do with me as a colleague, as a leader, as a parent, as a community member, as somebody of privilege? I think that we're getting a whole different level of interest in this, and the how really matters because we say, Verne Myers always has said diversity is being asked to the dance. Mm-hmm. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And to me, being asked to dance is the how. It is literally what behaviors do I need to exhibit to create the circumstances for diverse talent of all definitions of diversity to thrive. So I just love it. It's very animated. It's very active. It's very practical. I'm hoping it's a book that is on the shelf for every single people leader or someone who aspires to be a people leader or an individual contributor who just wants to create a better circumstance for themselves and their colleagues.
Yes. Yeah. One feature of it I really liked about the book is that it provides a map, if you will, to go from unaware to advocate. Mm-hmm. And so you propose a continuum of sort. And I like that this continuum is fluid, right? It can apply to a lot of different issues around diversity can apply to a lot of different types of people. How can someone that may find him or herself at some particular point of this continuum, how can they use this book in your perspective?
Yeah, so as a consultant, I always think in terms of models. I think they're really helpful because people want to know where they are before they start learning, right? They want to locate themselves. They also want to feel less alone. And I do think there are a lot of people who have felt they couldn't find their way into this conversation, or perhaps they weren't included in this conversation, which is interesting. And those people sometimes are of a certain demographic or a certain seniority, or perhaps in the majority in terms of senior levels of companies. So the model, I hope, takes the sting out of all of that, removes the shame that some people feel about not doing enough or not knowing what to do or saying the wrong thing, and really helps you understand that each phase of this, from unaware to aware to active to advocate, which are the 4 stages, there is no shame needed in terms of where you are, that you can always be learning and taking one step forward, even if it takes a year to take that step and your progress is slow. There's no such thing as any judgment in terms of where you are, as long as you are on the journey. I think of it like a train, and my message is jump on the caboose and just hang on. And it's okay if you never make your way up to the second to the last car, you know what I mean? And just get on. Yep. And if you feel that it's chaotic and difficult and awkward and unfamiliar and you have fear, all of that, I think, is to be expected with any new competency. I think that why is this any different than any new business skill or risk that we are expected to take on a daily basis in our quote unquote day jobs, right? So inclusion and inclusive behaviors are just like that. They're not always going to feel comfortable, but I don't think that's any really different than any other leadership stretch that we may take on. So I think that we also have an assessment at inclusiveleaderthebook.com, because I really did want to equip people with an actual report, if you will, about where they are according to my questions. So you can take that at inclusiveleaderthebook.com and help us kind of collect data as well about where are learners in this journey, because that was what I really wanted to understand, so that we can build more targeted learning programs, training programs, support communities, cohorts for everyone, so they don't feel sort of conspicuously out of step, but that they are actually doing their work on the back end, like right where it matters.
Yes, and that's great about the assessment. And as you were talking, I was also thinking about how some listeners of this podcast were going to be practitioners, either HR, human capital, talent, or diversity and inclusion practitioners. Do you have a sense of how people who work with leaders can use your book?
They've loved it the most. Yes, they are all my friends and clients, and we are a very tight community of practitioners. And that is me, that always will be me. So I'm always thinking about, on their behalf, how can they, with limited resources, right, small teams, big organizations to serve, and needy organizations, right? And now we're having the how conversation, so there's a lot of appetite and energy, which is great. So this book, I think, plus the assessment, is something that I wrote so that the end user, if you will, the leader in the organization, you could literally put this in their hands and they'll say, oh, this makes sense to me. I think I can do it. I feel empowered to do it. I feel that it's easy for me to do, and not as perhaps risky or scary as I thought it might have been. And then for that D&I leader to support them. And again, like I was just saying, with the right programs, the right level of learning. If you discover, for example, that your organization is not where you thought they were, if you implement the assessment across the board, that's really important information. And I'm not really aware of a lot of tools out there that practitioners can use to take a pulse on where the learners are. I mean, there's engagement surveys where we can have D&I related questions, and we can then cut the data. If you are lucky enough to work for a sophisticated organization where you can slice and dice by demographic, you can see the difference between how women of color answer the same question as, say, white, straight, identified men. But this is yet another lens to kind of take a pulse. And then I hope, it brings much more specificity to the content that you give to whom and when and how quickly. And also, by the way, if you discover you have a bunch of like level phase 3 and 4 folks who are active and even advocates, I would use them as best practice examples and teachers, because part of the definition of advocate level is how are you reaching back and bringing those in the unaware stage and the barely aware stage, how are you bringing them forward? Because one of my theories is that particularly amongst men as allies, that there is a very careful watching of behavior. And as more men as allies step up and are very public about their advocacy, and they normalize quote unquote risk taking, which I might say is not really, I'm not sure it's really risky, but the perception is what's important, right? Which is this is risky because I'm a man and I'm using my voice this way, or particularly I'm a white man and I'm using my voice this way. If we can normalize that, then I think we can, more than I could ever as a woman, I think we can actually say, hey, jump in, water's warm. This is like part of our leadership journey and responsibility, and this is what good looks like. And I'm really hoping that a lot of people follow that role modeling.
Definitely. And I can see the value of that and of creating allyships. And one thing that is connected to what you were just talking about, in your book, you talk about how people can use their own diversity stories as a way to maybe take these risks, right? And find common grounds and become more aware. Can you tell us a little bit how people can find their own diversity stories? Even you talk about how even the middle-aged white man has a diversity stories. How can we encourage them to find it?
Oh, goodness. Because many people think they don't have one. I got inspiration for this, I think, from Kenji Yoshino and Christy Smith's work, right? The Uncovering Talent Report, which I reference all the time and I love and I think really resonates with audience, because we all know what covering feels like and looks like. We might do it around different dimensions. We'd be surprised we do it along the same dimensions, a lot of us, even though physically we may look different to each other and identify as different ethnicities and genders. There are things we share under our waterline, if you think of us as icebergs. So a lot that we keep under that waterline. And I think that's the origin of diversity stories, right? It's those things that we don't bring fully to work, and that we spend time minimizing, hiding. We sense that they will be stigmatized or judged or trigger stereotypes. And some of us can hide aspects of our diversity stories and others of us can't. I walk into a room and my gender is apparent, or my appearing gender could be different than my sense of my gender, which is a whole different aspect. But so it's a visible and invisible aspects of diversity that are on our minds and hearts, and perhaps distracting us from being productive and present and giving that sort of full extra creative energy and discretion and thinking, because we're managing our identities and thinking, am I welcome here? Am I going to be able to thrive here? Do I see anyone around me that looks like me? And so, but I believe everyone has diversity stories, because in the report in Uncovering Talent, 45% of straight white men report covering as well. And it's along same stuff, but also different stuff. I've had people stand up and share their, spirituality, their religion, feeling that they're the only one, not wanting to talk about it, not wanting to highlight their sort of Jewish holidays, for example, that has been basically ignored by their colleagues who aren't Jewish. I've had executives stand up and say they don't have a college degree, but they're a C-suite leader, and they don't talk about it. And one guy said, my kids don't even know that I never graduated college. I've had stories about growing up in an alcoholic, abusive household. And it's funny because the leaders will say, I don't know what this has to do with my leadership. And that's where it gets really interesting, because the leader, for example, that didn't have the college degree, I said, that is hugely important for people to know who don't have traditional educational backgrounds, to see you and see more of your story, because that means that they will hang in there 1 minute longer because they know your story, they see what you've accomplished, and they can finally see in someone their truth and their journey, that it's not traditional, that it's not maybe, as commonly represented, but that there is an opportunity for them to be you someday. And once you can kind of make that flip, it far from being something that people are ashamed of, it actually is something that the leader can be uncomfortable, yes, about, and say, or say, I have a kid that just came out to me as transgender. Normally leaders would say, well, I don't want to talk about that at work. Mm-hmm. That is a common story that is happening across the board right now, I can tell you. And there's such a community to be found. And it's so important for leaders to be vulnerable. I often say, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not leading. So, leaders who might appear to be in a majority identity, it's even more important for those leaders to bring their full selves to work, tell their stories, normalize identities that a lot of us on the receiving end think don't exist. Yep. So I would say if you hesitate as a leader to think about like what's under your waterline, are you bringing your full self to work? What could you be shining a light about for others? Think about your legacy. Think about prioritizing your comfort over the fact that so many in your organization need to see a leader taking the courageous action. And think about your priorities and maybe be willing to revisit what that looks like for you. Because if you're not uncomfortable, you're not leading, and diversity is a great opportunity to kind of play with that and find what that is.
Yeah, and I love that your book also provide examples of exercises that people can do in their workplace to bring these stories up. So not to leave it just up to the single individual. So
Indeed.
It's great.
Yeah, we can't always be speaking up. Those of us who struggle to bring our full selves to work because we don't feel represented and perhaps our identities have been traditionally marginalized, we can't leave all the work up to the few of us. For me, I always come out as LGBTQ on keynote stages everywhere, whether I'm comfortable or not because I need to necessarily anymore, but because I may be shining a light for somebody in that audience that day. Yep. And we may never find out our impact. So, but I don't want to be the only one that's always telling my story. Yep. I'd like to hear from allies who say, Jennifer is an important individual to me because I'm an ally, and here's what that means to me. Or I have a kid that identifies this way, or I have a family member. Here's what allyship means to me. If we can kind of start to have that bigger conversation, it's going to normalize this for all of us and make lighter work for me and a lot of others that I care so passionately about that I don't want to be exhausted every day.
That's great. That's great. And we have to take a quick break for some quick announcements, and we'll be back in just a minute to continue our conversation with Jennifer Brown about her new book, How to Be an Inclusive Leader.
Can you, your team, or your company benefit from insights such as the ones provided in this podcast? They are immediately available when you join the Conference Board, a membership-based think tank that delivers trusted insights for what's ahead. Reaching across industries and geographies, we bring together our noted experts, senior executives from the world's largest companies, and nonpartisan practical research to help you address your most important business issues. Our membership packages are tailored to your organization's unique needs and budget. To learn more about our offerings, go to www.conferenceboard.org and click Join on the top bar to connect with one of our product specialists.
Hello, and welcome back to our discussion about the book, How to Be an Inclusive Leader, with the author, Jennifer Brown. Jennifer, we just spoke about some of the chapters in the book and how people can navigate the different elements and the different parts of the continuum. I wanted to dwell into some of the more specific recommendations, and you've already touched upon a couple of them. Many managers and business leaders think that it's better to keep personal challenges out of the workplace. And you already made the case why it's actually beneficial for employees to being able to bring your full self to work. Are there any interesting examples that you can think about that show how bringing your full self to work can help drive change?
Well, yes, I do think speaking about our experiences, anything that gets in the way of our productivity and our ability to be present, that, as I said, takes a toll on our productivity, our engagement, our ability to be innovative and present, right? Because we have to be relaxed to be creative. We have to be I don't think some of us are, who are doing double work every single day, feeling like we're sort of managing our safety and our identity relating to safety, can really truly be productive. So I know it was my story. I was closeted for many years, and it had the same exact toll on me and the tax that I felt that I paid without kind of really knowing it and seeing it, but it accumulated over time. And I am really mindful of the fact that nearly 50% of LGBTQ people are still closeted in the workplace today. So that story that I experienced is still, I'm one of the lucky ones. I was able to, working for yourself means you can kind of set the rules. And it's so important for me to be out, because that would be ridiculous if I weren't. However, I'm so mindful of everyone that is still closeted in the workplace. And it causes many of my friends, honestly, to have one foot out the door every single day. I think it opens up, if a headhunter calls, it opens your mind up to saying, maybe there is a better environment for me, and maybe I will leave this company. I sit here and I hear microaggressions all day. I don't feel I can talk about who I love. I don't see any out leaders in the company. It doesn't seem to be valued. The company doesn't have the necessary protective policies in place around LGBTQ. And if, we're a substantial part of the organization, I'm going to have one foot out the door. So I do think that if we could remedy that, and it's not just LGBTQ, this is kind of a metaphor for all of us, of any kind of difference. And then if you layer on multiple kinds of difference, right? If we're speaking about women of color, they are dealing with intersectionality, and a lot of us are dealing with intersectionality, which is the overlapping impact of multiple underrepresented or marginalized identities. That is an additional level of playing this dance of identity and comfort and safety, and bringing your full self to work and sort of being incremental about your identity and what you share and what you can hide and what you can't hide, and what you play up and what you don't talk about, even though it's visible. So, the stories I hear from my colleagues of color and my women of colleagues of color, and perhaps even the LGBTQ colleagues of color, is that, we're constantly thinking about our gestures, our physical dress, the formality of how we present ourselves, the way that we speak. And then you might add age into that, just to add another layer. And there's tons of covering relating to age. I'll just take young friends of mine who might have multi-generational teams, most of whom are older than they are. They're engaging in covering behaviors as well, in terms of being, quote unquote, so young for a job that they have. So age actually comes up a ton. Family needs, parenting needs, mental health, addiction issues in family and loved ones. It's literally, I just think we have to do so much more to really see the people that work in our company, and to be more progressive in terms of how we're addressing all the things that we leave behind, that we feel we need to leave behind, that we don't ask for, even though we need, because we don't see anyone else asking for it. And so we stay quiet. I mean, that is really the tragedy of it all. And so, I think we all have to be brave and step up, and maybe we have to be the first, and maybe we have to be the squeaky wheel. But I always kind of come to the role of allies, because if we're the squeaky wheel over and over, we are going to be paying the penalty for all the things that we bring up and all the norms that we challenge. It's going to kind of roll down to us. Whether we like that or not, it is true. You don't want to be the only, and then you don't want to be called angry or strident or all those, horribly stereotypical words that come our way unfairly. But that's part of unconscious bias. So allies really need to bring these messages. They need to understand what's happening for their colleagues, and they need to use their voice to bring it up, to raise it, to challenge it, to ask questions, to speak truth to power, because they are going to face less risk in doing so. So I really, really value my allies, and I strive to be an ally and use my voice how I can. Given the rooms I can get into, given the fact that I may not be called certain things. It's a really interesting kind of middle ground that some of us inhabit, and I think we need to utilize that more.
And you have some great examples of that in your book. And I was thinking too about how the kind of covering that you do in the workplace may say something about the workplace, the culture where you're
yes,
working,
indeed.
right? So it kind of help also that awareness sort of continuum that you talk about, and how you can go from being aware but actually to taking action on the
Right.
issues that you're aware of.
And you raised that earlier,
Yeah.
that you can be multiple places
Yes.
on the continuum. So you can be sort of advocate level with a community, perhaps of your own identity,
Yep.
right? Because you're in it. And so you understand it intimately, you know what the language is, you know how to use your voice, but you could be completely at the unaware level when it comes to other identities.
Yes.
And that's the opportunity, even for somebody like me that does this for a living. I could tell you like 3 areas that I'm really working on learning about right now, so that I can make sure I know what the problem is, I know what the challenges are, I know what the gaps are, I understand the experience, and that I can somehow find some language and comfort in advocating for and alongside and behind communities that aren't heard as much as my identity is heard and seen and valued. Because there's always work to be done.
Yes, there's so many different levels, and your metaphor of the iceberg and the visibility of different diversity dimensions is great to sort of think about. Oh, there's so much out there that we need to consider. And the one last thing about this, you also talk about humility. So when I'm thinking, when you're sharing your story, you might be a leader with power and influence, but we know that humility is a key element of inclusive leadership. And I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we can't wait to present our journey until it's perfect. And I think humility to me means sharing. It's like showing your work in the math problem. It's like, how did you get here? And where are you? Even if you don't have the answer, where are you in solving the equation?
Yeah.
And so I do think that if we wait until we're perfect, we won't cause change quickly enough. So I do think that showing where we are, admitting where we are, owning our mistakes. In fact, I was on a panel the other day, and I had met with the panelists ahead of time, and I said, we're going to share our gender pronouns. So everybody on board with that, and I had a couple of people on the panel who said, what do you mean pronouns? And it was a great opportunity for me to explain that. And then they said, oh, okay, I've got it. So he, him, his, whatever. I said, yes. So we got on stage, and lo and behold, I, as the moderator, forget to share my pronouns. So we introduced the panel. Some of the panelists remember, others do not. It comes back to me to start the discussion. And I said, I had made a point and a commitment to share my pronouns, and I just forgot. So I'm going to do it now.
Yeah.
That is an example of an alleged expert in myself saying, this was something I intended to do. And look, I'm an object lesson. It is a muscle that I have yet to develop fully. So I'm not going to hide that. I'm going to talk about it. And it's so fine. It is so more than fine. It's so important because it normalizes the journey. We're not all going to be perfect. We need to create a space and acknowledge ahead of time that we do not have all the answers, and that you want feedback. You want to know where you missed the mark. You want to know if you didn't refer to a certain community of identity in the absolutely correct way. You want to admit that language is changing, and you're making an effort. So I do think that vulnerability and that humility, Brené Brown says vulnerability is such a critical part of the leadership journey and competency. And in the future, and now younger talent wants to see the whole leader. They want to see, like, how is the sausage made? And that's not always a perfect picture. And actually that wins you a whole lot of points, which is kind of counter to, I think, how we think about particularly executive leadership, which is I have all the answers, I'm in charge, I'm infallible. And here we are talking about vulnerability and humility. So think of your leadership as breathable. Think about it as a flexible, sometimes you're going to get it right. Sometimes you're going to be learning, and you need to acknowledge that. You want to welcome feedback. I mean, none of us can do this well without somebody in an affected community to say, you did that wonderfully. I appreciated your story. That really landed. Or, I think I know what you were going for. Here might have been your intent, but here was the impact on me. And here was the impact on me. Here's how you might be able to tell it differently, or use that example, or use this language. We should be humble enough to make the fumble. Somebody said there's in the something about the humble and the fumble. We're going to make mistakes. Welcome it. Yes. Invite feedback. Don't be fragile. Don't be so fragile that you take your marbles and you go home after something doesn't go well. Things are not going to go well. It's just a fact. And you should welcome that opportunity to get back on the horse, do it again. Do it until you have the muscle. Do it until it becomes second nature. I mean, that's honestly the definition of advocate, level 4 in my book, which is that you are fierce, you're brave, you're bold, you don't ask for permission, you are resilient enough to not always get it right. Yep. But what you do know is that you have tons of passion and you're just going to come back swinging, but having adjusted and getting smarter every single time.
And you have to keep it up. So you make the case, as you said earlier, and you say in your book, it's a skill. Inclusive leadership is a skill that you have to develop, to practice. Yep. And I think that's a messaging that can help both individuals, team members. You don't have to even be managing others to be inclusive.
That's right.
And organizations, hopefully.
Yes. And I was going to say humility as well. We talk a lot about whose stories need to be told and whose have been missing. So I would recommend, too, in the book we talk a lot about this, that your diversity story is important, but you've got to pick your spots, know when your story is needed, particularly if you're in a majority group. You want to be careful that your passion doesn't cause you to kind of suck up all the air in the room. And I see a lot of super enthusiastic would-be allies, and they want to practice this, right? They want to get in there and use their voice. What's important is it's not always about you, and that often our job as would-be allies is to provide that platform to set somebody else up to tell their story, to be seen and heard, to get that visibility, and it's not about us having visibility. So it's this really interesting dance, because I know it might sound contradictory. Like I'm asking certain leaders to find their connection into diversity and tell their story, but I'm also asking them to step back and to use their platform and their access to give that access to somebody else. So it is both and.
Yes.
It is literally the act of stepping in or stepping aside or stepping back, and knowing when to do that. And that is kind of next level.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I so if you find that's kind of really overwhelming to think about, it's so okay. And I think we're all still figuring that out.
Oh, it's definitely. And it requires awareness and practice, as you said, but you see it all the time where you may have allies, men engaging in gender diversity initiatives that get a lot of credit for it.
Right.
Because they're men.
Exactly.
And sometimes may actually get better opportunities. So it's sort of you really have to be careful.
I know.
But it's better to try and then not be successful at first and continue to try that to completely step back from the conversation.
Exactly. I see men as allies, in particular senior leaders, really struggling with this. Yes. Like I will try to congratulate them and build them up and use them, their story and storytelling and activities and advocacy as examples. And then they'll immediately say, it's not about me. It's not about me. I don't want the platform. So, and then I'll say, but I need you to stay on that platform for a moment because people need to see what that looks like.
Yes.
Because I don't think many of us can't be the first. We could be the second. We could be the third. So the question for all of us, I think, to think about is like, are you that first? And then how do you create that balancing act? And you're doing these two sort of diametrically opposed things, which is using your voice and giving voice to others.
Yes,
so it's a very interesting moment, I think. I enjoy it. I think we don't know the answer. Mm-hmm. And but the balance, even talking about the striving for this balance, is something you could share as part of your journey. I mean, this is what I mean. The humility to say, this is the balance I'm trying to strike. And being overt about that, being public about that, I even think that is huge.
Yep.
So I don't have the answers. It's okay.
Yep.
But it's not what we've been taught. Leaders need to have all the answers, don't they? Yep. And so it's just this, again, it's sort of, how do you be a really strong, decisive leader that the organization needs you to be, and at the same time acknowledge where you are in a journey and all the answers that you don't have and the help that you need from others.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, this is such an important discussion, and we could have a 5-hour podcast about
Yes, we
it
could.
just to go over all the different points. But we're at time, and I wanted to ask a really quick question to wrap up. This is a podcast about books. It's called Off the Shelf. Are there any books that you're reading now, or any suggestions for the listeners of books, in addition to your 2 books on inclusion, that have inspired you?
Oh, so many. I am celebrating authors who are writing into a new space. So one that hasn't been addressed, that has been sorely needed. One that comes to mind is Minda Hart's new book called The Memo. And I think she has captured the need for a lean in for women of color. Mm-hmm. And we all know we loved Lean In. It really was groundbreaking. It also was one person's perspective. Mm-hmm. And that person's perspective happened to be from a certain position and a certain level of privilege, which is true for me as well. I share many of Sheryl Sandberg's identities. But I think that Minda's addressing of the how do you get a seat at the table, how do you secure the seat, as she talks about, has brought droves of women of color out who have not had a book that addressed their particular experiences and really was real talk about what happens that's different than from white women. So this is why intersectionality is so important for any would-be ally to wrestle with, to understand, to know their role in it. Read The Memo if you are not a woman of color. Read it, because that's how you start to understand the differences in experience and the different ways we need to utilize our voice, the different ways we need to support our colleagues, our mentees, our bosses, our mentors. I mean, it's all around us, I hope. I hope you're being mentored by a woman of color. And I hope that you can think about, like, what is she going through every day? And it's all in the pages of that book. So she's on a wild book tour right now. I don't know when she sleeps, but she's really, really making an important contribution that I want to make sure that I am letting as many people know about as possible.
Great. Thank you for the recommendation. And thank you again for speaking with us today. Thanks to our listeners for tuning in. You can purchase the book, How to Be an Inclusive Leader, at any bookstore and online. For more information, you can also visit the website, jenniferbrownspeaks.com. Again, it's all one word, jenniferbrownspeaks.com. In there, you can also find the self-assessment that Jennifer mentioned earlier to help identify where you fall on the inclusive leadership continuum. And please remember to subscribe to our off-the-shelf book discussion series to explore the entire catalog of podcast programming from the Conference Board. You can visit our website at www.conferenceboard.org/podcast. Again, that's www.conferenceboard.org/podcast. This is Laura Sabatini. Thank you for joining us today.